Last week, we talked about thinking like Jesus and having the attitude of Christ. And I kind of gave you, I gave you an assignment last week to go out and do something for someone that you have no chance of getting repaid for. Not telling anybody, just go out, do something kind for somebody. And I'll admit I had an ulterior motive here. My motive was that when we go out and we do things, getting nothing in return, what it should start to do in us is start to expose some things in us that maybe don't belong. Because when you go out and you're doing something kind for somebody and you have nothing coming in return, what starts, and maybe some of you did this, maybe some of you felt this, you start to feel like, hey, I want some credit for that. Or, hey, what am I supposed to get out of that? And so what that was is really just a test and a check for us to identify within us the things that don't belong. Last week we looked at the verse that says, have the attitude of Christ. And it says, don't be selfish. Look out for others. And so hopefully what happened, if you did that, going out and just choosing something to do, hopefully you started to catch some of those things in yourself. And this is a process. Understand, we're always in this process, becoming more like Christ. That's what we're doing. We've made it our goal to love like Jesus. And when you do that, you give yourself this really high standard that you're reaching for, and God is going to constantly be working on you. So let me tell you also, don't be discouraged when you find things in yourself that maybe don't belong. All that means is you're being honest. It's a good thing when we discover things within ourselves that don't belong, because they're there. They're there. The question is not, are they there? The question is, are we honest enough to address them? Today's going to be very similar to last week. These two go hand in hand. It's almost like a part two of Think Like Jesus. When I was younger, teenage age, things started to change for me. This is when, just the idea of becoming a more selfless person, and it's a struggle. It's constant, I'm not saying I'm there. But in my teenage years is when that started to happen, to when God really started to work on me. And part of the catalyst for that was taking part in things like going and feeding the homeless. We used to do that a lot when I was a teenager in our youth group. Here, and if you're fairly new here, we haven't done this in a little while, but we'll probably do it again after Easter. We do drives for kids down the street that don't have homes. They're in a group home. They've been removed from their homes, and they all live right down the street. So you'll see that pretty soon, and that's a way that we give to people who have no way of paying us back. But when I was younger, when I was a teenager, we did this. We would go out and we would feed homeless people. And the first time I ever did this has always stuck in my head. Because it was my youth group. It was a bunch of teenagers. I was in middle school. And we had this bus. It was like one of those shuttle buses, like that takes you like from the airport to the hotel, like that kind of bus. And I remember getting off the bus, and they said, all right, we're going to go pass out this food. And there were a lot of different approaches to this. We all did the same work, right? We all had these bags of food, and we went out and we found homeless people. It was in Sacramento, California, and we went under this bridge, and there were tons of homeless people. And we went out and we started handing out this food. So we were there for a little while, and after a while, our youth pastor says, hey, all right, it's time to go. And some people, they could not wait to get back on the bus, right? They're like running for the bus, and they get up and they're in the back of the bus. And I was kind of just a clueless kid, I'm like, oh, time to go, just kind of wondering. I wasn't hurrying, but I was like, it's time to go, get on the bus. And so I was kind of in the middle of the bus. And I get on the middle of the bus, and I hear people in the back of the bus. And they just did the work, right? They did all the right things. They had no way of getting paid back. They handed out food, and they're sitting in the back of the bus. And I remember this girl goes, ugh, those people are disgusting. And I'm sitting there, and as a kid, I'm thinking like, well, they are kind of dirty, and that guy did smell really bad. And then we're sitting there, and it seems like we're there a while. The bus starts filling up. And there's still some people missing. And I look out the window, and here's one of our people. He was maybe like a senior in high school or so, and he's sitting on the ground next to a homeless guy. And they're telling him, Ken, we got to go. And he's like, I'm coming. They're like, we got to go. Well, finally, Ken gets on the bus. And somebody goes, Ken, where are your shoes? And he goes, well, he didn't have any. And they go, Ken, we're going to eat right now. You can't go in the restaurant with no shoes. And he goes, well, what am I supposed to do? The guy didn't have any shoes. And they go, Ken, I know what shoes you had. Those were expensive shoes. And he goes, I'll go buy some flip-flops. And I was looking and thinking about that and thinking about we all went to the same place. We all did the same work. None of us had any chance of being repaid, but there was still a massive, massive difference between two approaches. There is, I'm giving this guy my shoes, and there is, disgusting. There is, I'm sitting on the ground with this person, and there is, I am never doing that again. There is, I see a need, I'm going to fill it. And there is, well, if those people wanted to make their life better, they could do something. There's two drastically different attitudes. And when you think about that attitude of going and helping somebody and still having that, you know what? Nobody wants to be helped like that. Sometimes we get that, where we go like, hey, I'm going to help you out. And then we go, well, they really just need to get their stuff together. And we go and we're doing the right things, but we're not approaching it right. And here's one thing that we have to remember, is that people have bigger needs than what we see. Because we can see, hey, this homeless guy needs some shoes and he needs some food, but you know what else he needs? He needs to be treated like a person. He needs to feel human. He needs to feel cared for. That's the attitude that we see in Jesus. That's the way that Jesus loved people. It wasn't, and think about this, we're talking about the Son of God here, in the flesh. And he's like, let me get down here with you. He's the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and he humbles himself and comes down and he goes, what do you need? Let me help. Not with an attitude of like, okay, I'm going to help you out. That's not what God does with us. We're going to look at one of the most humble acts that Jesus did that really embodies the attitude of a servant. Jesus meets our needs with love and humility. If anyone is superior, it is Jesus. And still, that's not the attitude that he takes with us, and it's not the attitude that we should take with others. John 13, I'm going to start with verses 1 through 5. It says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him." Here's Jesus. And understand, this moment, he's about to be completely glorified. He's going to take his seat next to the Father, Son of God. All things had been given to him, meaning he had authority over everything. And what does he choose to do? He gets down on his knees and he washes feet. Now, we do this sometimes. If you've ever been to a wedding, and maybe some of you did this, sometimes at weddings they do foot washing ceremony where the groom will wash his bride's feet, and then the wife will wash the groom's feet. And it's a really cool ceremony because it says, "I'm here to serve you." The wife says to the husband, and the husband says, "I'm here to serve you." And it's an act of humility. But let's get one thing straight. A bride's feet are never cleaner than on her wedding day. They probably smell pretty good. These disciples, they were walking around on dirt roads. And keep in mind, we're not talking about roads that cars traveled on. We're talking about roads that animals traveled on. I'm not going to go into any more detail about things that might be on their feet. Their feet were nasty. They stunk. And here's Jesus, Son of God, glorious, who we worship. And he's down on his knees, washing, serving. This was literally the role of a servant or the role of a slave. And Jesus gets down and he takes that on. What did Jesus have to gain? There was no selfish motive. He was serving. And also today, that's what we covered last week, having nothing to gain, having selfless motives. But also Jesus here's what I want us to grasp today. Jesus was not above the role of a lowly servant. And so today, what I'm telling you is that if we're going to love like Jesus, we have to serve like Jesus. Take the heart of a servant. There was a pastor, he was an evangelist in the 1800s, and he was very, very famous worldwide. His name was D.L. Moody, and he has some really great quotes. He said things like, "Character is what you are in the dark." It's pretty brutal, right? Your character is what you are in the dark. When nobody sees what's going on, that defines your character. He also said, if I take care of my integrity, if I take care of my character, my reputation will take care of itself. He was a man of character, and he lived it out. He actually got caught living that out a couple times. One time, D.L. Moody, very famous worldwide, he used to do these conferences in New York. He would do conferences, and people from all over Europe would, and again, we're talking about 1800s here, and travel was slower, communication was slower. It's a big deal when people from all over Europe come to see somebody speak in America, just to hear the guy talk. He's putting on a conference. Well, there were some customs that were a little bit different in Europe than they were in New York at the time. And one of them is that in hotels in Europe, it was very common that you could take your shoes, set them outside your door at night, and someone would come shine them. And then in the morning, you open up your door and you get your shoes out, and you have nice, polished, clean shoes. They didn't do that at the hotel that all of these people were staying at in America. So when this conference was happening, all of the people came from Europe. They're all checked into the hotel. And D.L. Moody's in the hotel. And he's walking down the hallway and he notices all these shoes are outside of the door. And he goes, oh, man. He's thinking this is going to be awkward and people are going to feel weird because they're going to put their shoes out there and it's not going to get done, and then everybody's going to have unpolished shoes and it's going to be this whole thing. That night, one of Mr. Moody's friends went to his room. And when he opened up the door, he found D.L. Moody, world-famous speaker. People came from around the world to hear this guy talk. And he's sitting on his bed with a pile of shoes, shining them. It would have been very easy to knock on the doors and go, hey, we don't do that here. Or just let it go. They'll figure it out. You know, he was looking for an opportunity to serve. He didn't go tell anybody. He got caught. He got caught. And the only reason anybody ever knew about that is because his friend went and told people. And then those people took turns volunteering, shining shoes. That's the heart of a servant. And two things I want us to notice about that. One is Mr. Moody was thinking like Jesus. He had the attitude of Christ. He was not selfish. He wasn't trying to impress anybody. He had nothing to gain by shining people's shoes. And also, he was serving like Jesus. He wasn't above doing this lowly job. He wasn't above serving the people who came to hear him speak. It would have been very easy to go, all these people are here for me. It's an easy attitude to take on. They're here for me, so, hey, can we get someone to take care of this? It would have been easy. But he has the heart of a servant. That's the heart. That's the attitude that we need to take on. The attitude that Jesus had. The wrong attitude, especially from someone who claims to be a Christian, can be completely destructive. The wrong attitude can be totally destructive. My wife has a friend, and she's engaged, and she's pregnant. And she has grandparents who kind of raised her. And her grandparents are very, very religious. They're always in church every Sunday. They pay their tithe. They go to church. They read their Bible. When she got pregnant, her grandparents stopped talking to her. They said, you're living in sin. You get your stuff together, then come to us. We love you. And she told Heather, she said, I never want to go to church again. I have a thing with God, but I don't want anything to do with church. Because I know how people at church are. Her grandparents, the attitude that they took was totally destructive. When you know what a pregnant single woman needs? She needs help. You know what a single mom needs is help. She needs to know that she's cared for. She needs to know that she's loved. Most of the time, people that do things that were not the right choice or a good choice, they know. They know. If the Holy Spirit can't convict them, don't think that it's your turn to try. That's that sit in the back of the bus and go, oh, that's disgusting. That's that attitude. I never want us to be a church that takes that approach. Think about the story of the prodigal son. He went off, blew all his money, ended up living in a pig pen eating slop. He was disgusting. And when he came home and his father saw him, his father didn't say, hey, servants, go out, get him cleaned up and bring him to me. No, his father ran to him and embraced him in all of his filth. That's what it is to serve like Jesus. That's who Jesus is to us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's how he shows his love. That's who we should be to others. Not wait for them to be pleasing to us and then say, okay, I'll do something nice for you now. I'll be kind to you now. It's that love, it's that kindness, it's that attitude of a servant that changes a heart. Jesus was washing his disciples' feet, and in John 13:6, it says, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash your feet, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, the one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. A lot of times, I think the last time I went through this story, I really focused on Peter. There was another disciple that gets a lot of attention here. And I want us to really try to grasp what Jesus was doing here. Because he was going down the line, right? He's washing James' feet, Bartholomew, Simon, not Simon Peter, the other Simon, Simon the Zealot, Thomas. And he gets to Peter, and Peter's like, no, you can't wash my feet. And Jesus is like, you're out if I don't. And so he goes, wash all of me. And they have this exchange. Peter didn't quite grasp what was happening. And he continues down the line. And he's down on his knees, washing the feet of Judas. Judas, who was about to totally betray him for 30 pieces of silver. And Jesus takes his feet and he's washing him, taking the role of a servant, not just to the people who follow him, but to the person who turned his back on him. It's very clear that Jesus knew exactly what was going on. Jesus served the person who decided to be his enemy, his betrayer. When Jesus came and he said, hey, love your enemies, he didn't just tell us, he showed us. And that word love, it doesn't mean, hey, have fond feelings toward. It means serve. It means love. It means do. So Jesus continues to wash. Verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. The command there is not, hey, make sure you wash each other. Their feet were already washed. What he's saying there is serve one another. Paul says submit to one another. You are a servant to one another. Not with the feeling or attitude of superiority, but if Jesus took the attitude of a servant toward the person who was going to kill him, how much more should we take the attitude of a servant to everyone around us? Not because they have something to give us, not because they're a well-respected person, but because Jesus Christ lives in us and we've experienced his love, his unselfish, undying love for us, and that's what should be coming out of us. If we're going to love like Jesus, we need to serve like Jesus. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do this week. Last week, I asked you to do something from which you had no chance of getting any return, no chance of getting any praise, and not tell anybody about it. We're going to take another step today. This one might be a little more difficult. Because maybe last week, if you did this, if you took this step and you went out and you did something kind for somebody, you might be going like, man, am I really not getting anything for this? There might be some things in there that we start to see in ourselves. Or maybe you'll get this feeling like, man, I'm doing what God called me to do. And you find joy in that. That's the ultimate goal. There's so much joy in loving the way that Jesus loves. So this week, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. We're going to follow Jesus, serving with humility. I want us to all do this. Do something kind for someone who is not kind. Do something kind for someone who is not kind. That's what Jesus did. Washes Judas' feet. I mean, what's more unkind than betraying Jesus? Jesus was tortured, put on a cross. And he knew it. Jesus knew what was coming. He knew Judas planned to betray him. And what does he do? The most humble, kind thing that he could possibly do in that moment, wash his feet. Judas still betrayed him. He had nothing to get. What did Jesus have to gain by washing Judas' feet? Only showing us the example of a servant. Showing us who we're supposed to be. These selfless people who don't only look out for ourselves, but we look out for others. People who don't hold grudges. People who are not bitter. People who are humble. And we have to take these intentional steps. It's hard to get there. Because what do? We do something humble, and then we're like, man, I'm pretty humble. Let's start over. Yeah. But I want us to do this week. Let's do this. Let's be intentional. Let's take some steps here. Find someone that's not kind. It's not hard to find. And find something kind that you can do for them. And understand that they may not change, because we get this attitude like, oh, I did the kind thing, and then they're still rude. Yeah, they might always be. It's not always about them. Sometimes it's about what's going on here. It's about what's going on here. It's Jesus working in us, changing us. And that is the best chance you have to change that person, by serving, by loving, by taking the attitude of Christ toward them. That's our goal. Will you guys commit to doing something like that this week? I got a lot of nods in it. It's not easy. It gets easier. Let's do it. Let's be intentional about serving the way that Jesus serves us. We have nothing to give him except us, and he wants us for some reason. Let's take that attitude toward the world. Let's take that attitude not only toward people that we like, but toward people who are difficult. Because you know what difficult people need? They need Jesus. They need to experience his love. They need to experience his kindness. And we have him inside of us, and it needs to come out.